Even a foreign language cannot be used by a country to develop.
And you are speaking English right now.
But that is the issue. That is the product of our education system. If I speak my native language, the African, other Africans will not understand it. That is the disconnection that exists. I speak 4 different languages. But if I speak those languages, I can only communicate with people in West Africa.
So are you saying that we can be able to develop with that kind of ethnic diversity, different languages? Then what we used to communicate, are we heading back to side language in barter trade back in the days?
No, but I think, we live in a very advanced world whereby English that we are speaking today is not a traditional language in Africa. It was introduced, programmed with strategies. To some extent, we all adapted. Can't we do the same? Or is there anything that exists as these are the people who knows it all and they do it all, and some individuals don't and they cannot do it?
In this video, this young Pan-Africanist boldly lectures African leaders on the way forward and things they need to do in order to move Africa to the next level. Now, some African countries are beginning to make headway. He mentions countries like Mauritius and other countries which are on track, Rwanda and co, which are on track in order to achieve economic freedom. The majority of African countries are still not finding headway. So he suggested some of the solutions to the problems that is facing Africa. And I believe if African leaders implement majority of these things that he is mentioning in this video, it is really going to help Africa be put on the global map. So let's listen to him as he explains in this video what African leaders need to do in order to move Africa forward. But before we watch the video, if you haven't yet liked this video, kindly like the video and also subscribe to the channel. Let's watch the video together.
Swahili, for instance, there is a progress in East Africa where so many countries now have adopted it as official language. It is being taught in schools, and that is empowering the young people in believing in a language. Language is very important. A Chinese can become a doctor without being able to speak English and French. And that is not possible for a Nigerian, not possible for even a Rwandan, not even possible for a Gambian. That is the wrong that we are talking about in the education system. So we have to be able to produce individuals with skills, with knowledge, with everything, relying on our realities. And that the first step in that is changing or designing the curriculum that fits the African purpose. With African languages that can be generalized within the continent, where people try to embrace them bit by bit. But without that, our call can never be realized.
Very true. Do we see some success stories in Africa?
Sure, there are. We just talked about Rwanda, for instance. We have seen what is going on in Mauritius. We have seen other countries like in Kenya. We have seen countries like in South Africa and etc. Even though if you analyze most of them in depth, you come to realize that they also have like few lapses in some of their models and etc. Some of them are still trapped with foreign aid, with debts, loans, from Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF, the World Bank. We've seen recently how Chinese are using their financial, strength to more of recolonize African countries, as a result of the little finance that they're giving us, using paper money in exchange with our valuable resources. But we have these problems, but it doesn't mean that we can't fix it. We can fix it. We just have to look inward. We have to start looking down, because relying on the West has not solved the problem. And Garvey said one thing that was very important. Any leadership that teaches you to rely on another race for survival, that leadership will enslave you.
Osman, we've been reading this great book with you, The Post-Development Reader. And present something like a mainstream media propaganda. Why I just support that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that is the work of Majid and Victoria, which is a very good work in development studies. But basically, if you look at the mainstream media, it operates in a way that way before the publication of this very book, in fact, it has ever been there. And that is the beauty of academic, because they can always look into things that happen in our societies and come up with solution to it. I will recommend every development student to automatically visit this very literature. Now, looking at the mainstream media, we have been portrayed as a continent in a way that there is no life in this continent. The continent is not developing. It is looked at as a continent that only has poverty in it. These are the images shown by the outside world about Africa, and this image must change. It must change in a way that if an image portrays poverty, it doesn't attract investors to come. Africa must have an image that attracts investment, not foreign investment, but investment by Africans themselves. We have so many individuals living in the diaspora, and that is why I always make this call. Africa is the future for investment, but Africans have to take the lead in it. And I'm saying this because if you look at the mainstream media today, we have millions of people living in the streets of America as homeless. They do not want us to see that. They don't want us to see poverty existing in European countries. We've seen how Britain is. We've seen, how Italy is. We've seen how some of these countries are. They have their own issues that they find it difficult to solve among themselves. Just one example. Look at how the Ebola epidemic was portrayed, and Africans were portrayed during this crisis or during this disease outbreak. And what happened when the COVID was killing people in the Western world? These images were not shown. So that is why it's high time for us as Africans to develop media outlets among ourselves. And medias that are not in line with our principles, with our agendas, we have to kick them out of the continent. It's either they be neutral and show the beautiful part of the continent as well, or else they stay in their own countries. That is the fact. But we cannot just be here and being portrayed in a way that, as if there is no life. So they have to be neutral. And if you look at this very book, you will understand how media has a role to play in balancing power at the international level. That is why you see all these so-called superpowers have a media outlet that propagates their own agendas, even though sometimes they are built on, promises that are not even materialistic. So we must be aware of this. And the mainstream media have been the cause of most of the problems in Africa. They portray the Western world as if everything there is perfect, brainwashing the youths who doesn't have time to look in depth as to what is happening. And therefore we've seen Africans dying in the Mediterranean Sea. We've seen Africans dying in refugee camps in Europe. We've seen Africans being sent to prisons. Innocent people treated differently just because they are in different continent or just because of the color of their skin. So all these things are happening because of the mainstream media. So we must be aware of it now, develop media outlets and build up a network among themselves, and they have the African agenda forward. Then Africa can have a single voice.
A single voice for Africa.
Africa 24 is indeed a great media. I think those are some of the individuals that we really need to empower, and making sure that Africans invest in media outlets like this, so that they can have the opportunity to extend their channels across the continent and even beyond the continent, to make sure that Africans are informed with the best things happening in the continent as well. But if we don't know what is happening, we find it difficult to embrace it. So media is very important. It is one of those most important instruments that you can use to change a society. Because the first step in realizing a development model or a development agenda is through communication. And communication has to be built in a way that it is persuasive in nature, whereby it can ignite the spirit of participation, the spirit of responsibility in an individual, for them to take up visions as collective in a particular society to make change. So media outlets owned by Africans in the continent must be empowered.
Welcome back. So in the continent of Africa, majority of the countries are struggling to develop. Africa has been a continent that is blessed with a lot of natural resources, but these natural resources are not exploited to the benefit of the people in Africa. There are diverse problems that is bedeviling the people in Africa, and it seems like majority of the leaders in Africa are not ready to help solve majority of these problems. Now, this young Pan-Africanist outlines some of the measures that can be put in place in order to help Africa develop, and he mentions a lot of them and explains them in this video. Now, he talks about the education system, which he believes that it needs to be reviewed. When the colonial masters came into our land and then taught us their language and the way they do their things and made us believe or think that the way we do our things is quite inferior, he believes that we can do things differently, and this will help us grow as a people. Now, he spoke about acquisition of technical and vocational skills in our educational curriculum rather than the rote learning, that is memorizing things in order to just be employable or just be suitable for white-collar jobs, which are non-existent here in Africa. He believes that if the countries in Africa, our education system is geared towards technical education and vocational skills acquisition, he believes that this continent can be transformed from its current state to a better state. He also mentioned about the economic ideas or economic systems that we have here across Ghana. Now, the colonial masters made this land a raw material producing continent so that we can feed their industries in the West. So majority of the raw materials that are mined or produced here in Africa are exported to the Western country for value to be added to it. And he believes that if this is changed, it is going to help Africa in the long run. We will be able to manufacture and process a lot of the raw materials that we manufacture in the continent, and this in the long run will be able to help us create a lot of jobs for the teeming youth on the continent of Africa, so that they do not leave the continent of Africa and then try to cross the continent of Africa to the Western world, where they end up drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. But we'll be able to keep our people over here, provide them with good jobs, good and high-paying jobs. Also, he mentions on the political system that is in Africa, which is not really helping African countries. Now, they introduced to us this multi-party democracy system, which does not help African people develop, because a lot of people would have several ideas and put themselves together as political parties in order to run for political power. And whereas this party believes in doing this, the next party also believes in doing a different thing altogether. So each party, when they take turn in office, they do not continue the works of the other political party, and this in turn affects the growth of the continent. So these are some of the reasons why he thinks that Africa, if it needs to develop, should change some of these underlying factors. Let me know what you also think about all these in the comment section below. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and your family on other social media platforms like WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X, and other social media platforms. Also subscribe to the channel. Just click the subscribe button down here. Click on the subscribe button. Click as well on the notification bell. And I'd like to see you again in my next video.